The 2024 NFL season was full of disappointments, from teams that were expected to make the conference championship game not even making the playoffs, to quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins and Caleb Williams falling way short of expectations. Well, in today's video, I'm going to take a look at some of the most disappointing players and teams of them all right after First up is going to be the New York Giants. I know nobody expected them to be good this season, and they weren't, but they have had some of the wildest self-inflicted wounds in recent memory. They let Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney walk in free agency, and they both made first-team All-Pro with their new teams this year. Obviously, Saquon's about to play in a Super Bowl, and he had over 2,000 rushing yards on the ground, which is unreal. So they let those two players go. Then they decided to hand a 4-year, $160 million deal to Daniel Jones ahead of the 2023 season, and he played so bad this past year that they benched him in November, which led to him ultimately requesting a release, which they granted. They hit on a couple rookies like Tyrone Tracy and especially the dog, Malik Neighbors, but it won't matter if they can't find somebody to throw them the football. It may seem odd to call the Giants a disappointment when nobody expected them to really be good in the first place, but the real letdown is that on top of losing two elite players in their prime and free agency, they absolutely fumbled their chance at getting the first overall pick. They were 2-13 heading into week 17 and were in line for it, but they shockingly beat the Colts and kissed that dream goodbye. They ended up with the third overall pick and could still wind up with a quarterback depending on how the draft plays out, but this is a weak quarterback class, so you never really know. The fact that they couldn't even tank properly is pretty on brand, so we'll have to see what ends up happening with the Giants next year. Then, when you consider how important the quarterback position is and how high the expectations are, I'm not sure any one player had a more disappointing season than Kirk Cousins. I think a lot of the expectations were created from the contract he signed. 4 years, $180 million, that is a pretty big commitment to a soon-to-be 37-year-old quarterback coming off of an Achilles tear the season prior. They put quite the bet on him to lead this offense that features a lot of talent: Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts, to name a few. And though it was pretty shocking at the time, they were probably pretty smart to hedge their bet by drafting Michael Penix 8th overall. Ideally, they wouldn't even have paid Kirk in the first place, because now they're either going to have the most expensive backup in the world, or they're going to have to eat a piss ton of dead money by releasing him. It's certainly not how either side envisioned the season panning out, but honestly, the only person Kirk has to blame for his poor play is himself. They started out the year going great, 6-3, and they led the NFC South by a couple games at that time. Well, Kirk then turned into an absolute pumpkin, and they dropped 4 straight games before finally benching him with 3 weeks left in the season. Michael Penix did look pretty good overall, but man, having to wait that long, it was too little too late, and all she wrote. Get this, though. Kirk turned the ball over so much that despite sitting the final 3 games, he still ended up tying for the most turnovers in the NFL. Like I said before, he'll either be their backup next year, or they'll release him and he can sign to a team for pennies on the dollar like Russell Wilson did with Pittsburgh after Denver released him last year. The issue with that is every quarterback-needy team is nowhere close to being a playoff contender, so I guess if you're looking to go anywhere from 7-10 to 8-9, 9-8, somewhere around there, and then maybe even miss the playoffs entirely, he could be your guy, because, I mean this with the utmost respect to Kirk Cousins, but in his 13-year career, he has only had 1 playoff win, which is less wins in the postseason than Jaden Daniels, who is a rookie. Speaking of teams not making the playoffs, another team that was a massive disappointment this season is going to be the Cincinatti Bengals. And no, I'm not just saying that because I'm a Chiefs fan. Many predicted them to potentially make the AFC Championship before the season started. Joe Burrow then had his best statistical season of his career, throwing for nearly 5,000 yards and 43 touchdowns, both of which led the NFL. Jamar Chase became just the 6th receiver to win the Triple Crown, so he led the league in catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Yet despite of their best 2 players having career years, they finished 9-8 and missed out on the playoffs entirely. You can't fully blame the offense. They weren't perfect, but were far from the main problem, and they finished top 10 in both points and yards. The problem mainly was their defense. They gave up 25.5 points on average and almost 350 yards a game, both of which ranked 25th in the NFL. Oh yeah, and that's also with Trey Hendrickson leading the NFL in sacks with 17.5. That was 3.5 more than Myles Garrett, who had the second most. They literally had their quarterback lead the league in passing, their wideout lead in receiving, and their edge rusher lead in sacks, and still couldn't make the playoffs. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. It's a pretty complex issue that went deeper than just their defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo, who they fired, but it's safe to say the Bengals have some things to address this offseason. That's not even to mention T. Higgins is a pending free agent, and then both Trey Hendrickson and Jamar Chase are on the last year of their deals and wanting paid. And before I get into the next player or team that was a pretty big disappointment this season, I wanted to shout out the sponsor of today's video, Underdog. That's not only the best and easiest place to play fantasy sports, by the way, but any new signup who uses code CBTH will get up to $1,000 in bonus cash plus a free pick. It's a Travis Kelce pick in the lobby for the big game. And speaking of the big game, they have a little promo that they are running that's very interesting to me. It's the big game, no sweat promo. You basically win or you get your up to $10 bonus credit back, and you can choose between 2 and 4 picks. If you win, you get your multiplier. If you lose, you get your money back. So that's basically a win-win to me. If you're interested in that, feel free to join in on the Pick'em Fun. Again, use code CBTH for up to $1,000 in bonus cash. That Travis Kelce gimme pick in the lobby. And you can do that by scanning the QR code that's on screen, or the link is in the description down below. Next up, I think the Lions deserve to be on this list, but hear me out. Their fans have never seen anything like this season they just witnessed. They just went 15-2, which is the most wins they've had in a season in franchise history. That got them the 1 seed in the NFC and secured home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So for a team that's never even made a Super Bowl before, this was the greatest season in their franchise's history. That's why it had to hurt like hell for Lions fans to see their team get bounced in the divisional round of the playoffs by the Commanders after being hyped up as Super Bowl favorites all year. I mean, Detroit was 8.5-point favorites in this game, and the Commanders winning was a massive upset. Obviously, the Lions' defense was decimated by injuries, especially towards the end of the year, but they still could have won that game had the offense not turned the ball over 5 times. And while I think we all assume Detroit should be back next year, Lions fans know all too well that success is never guaranteed. Their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, took the Bears head coaching job, and then their DC, Aaron Glenn, took the Jets head coaching job. So now you're replacing 2 key coaches that have both been there for several years. Well, I don't know if they can win 15 games again, but I do think they'll be a legit contender in the NFC, especially after getting healthy in the offseason, or at least that's my belief. Speaking of Ben Johnson, he's got his work cut out for him in Chicago because they, and especially Caleb Williams, were one of the bigger disappointments of the year to many. Some of it's not Caleb's fault. Their O-line was bad. The OC got fired during the season, and then eventually their head coach on top of that. But based on the offseason expectations, they fell well short of the mark. We heard all offseason long about how this might be the best situation a quarterback taken first overall has stepped into with all the talent he had on offense. You had DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet. They also drafted Rome Odunze in the first round as well, so all solid weapons. But it doesn't really matter if your line can't hold up. I mean, good God, Caleb took 68 sacks on the year. That led the league by far, but it was also tied for the 3rd most sacks by a quarterback in NFL history with David Carr. Again, a lot of that is because of the O-line, but Caleb also at times was trying to do way too much, and it led to a lot of those sacks or him just throwing the ball away, which is something he also led the league in, believe it or not. He made his living off extending plays in college, and he tried to do that too often this year. He also struggled big time with his accuracy. He missed a lot of wide open guys and was actually 31st in completion percentage. I think Ben Johnson is going to help him get the ball out on time. Detroit's offense was very timing-based, getting the ball out quick and into the hands of their playmakers. Jared Goff, for example, actually led the league in yards coming after the catch and passing yards on play action this year. Then hopefully they can bring in some O-line help via the draft and free agency to give Caleb a little more time in the pocket. If that happens, I think we could see a big second-year leap out of Caleb. If not, the criticism is going to get loud pretty quickly because this year was already a letdown with him being one of the most highly touted prospects in recent memory, than not even being the best rookie quarterback this season. Another team I want to hone in on is the San Francisco 49ers. They were fresh off of a Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs, and most assumed because of that and just their dominance in recent years, they would be right back in the big game or at least make a deep playoff run once again this season. Well, instead, they had the season from hell, going 1-7 in their last 8 games to finish the year 6-11 and miss the playoffs. They were definitely not without their fair share of injuries, though. Christian McCaffrey missed most of the year with that weird calf/Achilles injury. I think it was even in both legs. Brandon Ayuk tore his ACL. Deebo Samuel and George Kittle both missed a few games with injuries, and Ricky Pearsall literally got shot before the season started. And that's just to name a few. Just take a look at these numbers from this year compared to last. Last season, so 2023, they were 3rd in both scoring offense and defense, but this year they finished 13 in scoring offense and 29th in scoring defense. Not great. They did just recently bring back Robert Saleh as their defensive coordinator, though, so maybe he can get that defense back to its former glory. It's going to be interesting to see which direction the Niners head as an organization, because they've had the same core for several years now and have come up short in the postseason year after year with a lot of their top talent aging. Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams, and Kyle Juszczyk are all going to be 29 or older next year, with a few of those guys already being well over 30. I also think they're going to sign Brock Purdy to a big extension and run it back next year as a healthier team, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a complete rebuild happen within the next couple of years. Then I can't forget about injuries happening to some players that just led to a disappointing season, because it's an unfortunate part of the game. We saw guys like Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Rashee Rice, Aiden Hutchinson, Christian Darrisaw, Trevor Lawrence, and many others have their seasons cut short due to injuries. So that is always incredibly disappointing to see some of the biggest stars in the game go down. That was just some of the players. The list is long with injuries because of how violent this sport is. But you guys got to let me know in the comments down below who else was a major letdown to you or disappointment this year, based on a variety of factors. Was it a team, a player, a coach? Let me know either way in the comments down below. And with that, I'll see y'all next time.